today I want to talk about something that can really make or break a bag, the zipper installation. And this is something I know many people are terrified of doing because it's so easy that it turns out bumpy or uneven. But luckily there are ways to avoid this. And this is one of the things I teach in my classes, but I thought I would show you here today how I do to avoid these little bumps. The main problem is usually the zipper pull. In these cases when you cannot install the zipper tape alone and then add the zipper pull, like when making the Denver double zip bag, which is actually what I'm making here. Anyway, what you'll need is double-sided tape, and this is double-sided quilting tape. It's exactly 1/4 inch, which is the seam allowance we'll be using when we sew down the zipper, so that's quite handy. Make sure you don't get wider tape because then you'll get problems with the presser foot possibly sticking to it, or you have to remove it afterwards, which doesn't look very nice and it's a bit of a hassle. Can be done though because this is water soluble, so you can just dissolve it. Anyway, I have my lining here and I'm gonna attach the tape to the very edge of the lining, and I make sure not to pull the fabric or anything, because if you pull the fabric, you risk getting those little bumps anyway, even though you get your zipper in straight. So make sure not to stretch or pull. I tear off the edge because then I find it easier to take off the tape cover. And just because I'm going to show you here now, it doesn't want to come off anyway. Isn't that typical, by the way? Always the case. If you're demonstrating something, it has to be a bit of a trouble. So now I'm going to start adding my zipper, and I start in one end, and now it's a bit troublesome because I can't really see. I have my phone right in the way here, so please excuse me. Anyway, I start slowly making sure the zipper tape is edge to edge with the lining fabric. But here's the important part. Before I get to this little bump you can see that the zipper pull makes, I make sure I have this zipper tape properly attached to the double-sided tape. And then before I add this section here, I carefully pull the zipper pull out of the way to the section that I've already stuck in place. And I'm going to put it a little more there. And you see, there's no bump here. And now I can continue putting this in place, carefully edge to edge, without any kind of little bumps or unevenness. And this is where the magic will happen later when you sew it down, because then you actually avoid getting that little bump. And I'm going to add my top fabric in exactly the same way, but since this bump now is already gone, I don't actually have to move the zipper pull when I'm adding the exterior fabric. So I've saved myself a bit of trouble. This here is what it will look like when we've taped both pieces together. It's, oops, sorry, sent you rocking there. It's a perfectly straight line. And now I'm gonna realign the camera so I can show you what I do when I'm sewing it down. So, I'm sewing on my Juki TL2200 QVP Mini. So for this one I can actually use industrial presser feet. And that is what I have here, and this is a 1/4 inch compensator foot, which has a little compensating guide here, which is really handy, especially when sewing with layers or when sewing edge work like this actually is. Because unlike many of you, I really don't like using zipper foots when sewing down zippers, because I find there's too much movement and it's too easy to get on straight line. So I actually usually work with my compensator foot now, but before then, when I had a domestic, I used a 1/4 inch guide foot like you use for quilting. Since you get that perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance with this, you can use this, or if you don't have one, you can actually, even if you have a stitch in the ditch foot with a big opening here, you can actually just move your needle as far as you can to the left and then use the guide in the middle, depending on your sewing machine's possibility to move the needle, how much it can actually move it. Anyway, try the different pressure fits you have for your machine and find out what works for you. As I said, I'm using the compensator foot because I want to make sure my line is perfectly straight. If you've been to one of my classes, you will know how much I love these kind of aids. That makes it easy and fun to sew because I don't have to worry about sewing a perfectly straight line. My guide foot will make that for me. So anyway, make sure you have a proper stitch length. Depending on your machine, that can be anywhere from 2.2 to 2.5 probably when sewing pieces together. And then we start stitching. And somewhere around here is actually my zipper ball. And you don't want to continue sewing over this because if you do, well, you will get a bump in your seam anyway. So before you get to the little zipper ball, stop with your needle down. And I don't know, unfortunately, I don't think you can see, but there's a zipper ball. So needle down and lift your, oh, don't stomp on your start button while you do this. I was using the knee lift, looking into the camera and sewing at the same time. Not a good idea. One thing at a time, people. Anyway, do not sew, but keep the needle down and carefully pull your needle, not your needle, but your presser foot pull out of the way. Like that. Ta-da! And now you have a perfectly smooth area to continue sewing. And then we continue. And since I have the guide foot, it is so easy to get that perfectly straight line. And I continue all the way to the edge here. There we go. And then you can see, oh, since I'm working with quite heavy interfacing, it's going to be a bit bumpy until I've ironed it, but I'm hoping you'll be able to see the, oops, God, this is difficult when I'm trying to show you in the, anyway, let's see if you can see. Oh, it looks all wonky now because it's all bumpy, but anyway, once I press this, it will actually be perfectly straight all the way. Now it's just the top stitching left, and for this I use a compensator foot again, but this time instead of the 1/4 inch one, I use my 1.5 millimeter, which is roughly 1/8 of an inch, a little narrower, and I use about 3.2 in stitch length. But this is entirely up to preference. You can of course use longer or shorter depending on what looks good on your machine and with your thread. I've chosen to use a matching thread because I'm making more than one and this thread fits both, so I don't have to keep switching. As I'm working with double-sided fusible, I wasn't able to actually press my front here, so it looks a little bubbly still, but once I stitch it down it will look much better. And have chosen to make sure that the bottom here doesn't accidentally get bubbly or risk being able to catch in the zipper when I use the bag later. I have chosen to, instead of pressing, since it's a double-sided fusible, I've chosen to put these oh, what are they called in English? Wonder clips, right? Wonder clips at the bottom to line them up and that way hold it out of the way as I'm sewing. If you don't have a compensator foot for your machine, but you're using a domestic, you can use your Stitch in the Ditch guide foot, which has a guide like this one, but it's in the middle of the presser foot. And then you just move your needle a little to the left to get the desired distance from the edge here to your seam line. And it will work just as well, and it will give you a guaranteed perfect result every time. And that's what I love about all these helpful presser foot we have for our machines that we rarely know all the many handy uses for. Anyway, let's do this. Let's get stitching. And I'm gonna try to take it a little slow here to make sure, since it gets a little wobbly and bubbly with the zipper. And I carefully move the zipper pull out of the way constantly, since I don't want to risk any unevenness to my stitch line. And now, as I've passed enough of the zipper tape that I can pull it out of the way, I stop with my needle down, I lift my presser foot, and I do this with my knee lift. So you can just as well just use your lift back here. Anyway, once the zipper pull is out of the way, it's all smooth sailing and we can finish our stitch line. And then as I'm working with a bit of a bulky interfacing here, I stop to finger press a little here and there just to make sure I get as good a result as humanly possible. I really hope you can hear me over my machine once this is done, since I'm talking and sewing at the same time. Anyway, there we are. And now you can actually see that the seam we made is, still looks bumpy because I haven't sewn the other one. But anyway, it is actually a perfectly straight zipper, or will be as soon as I've sewn the other side. But for that, there's a few steps left. And as I am redoing this pattern, I'm gonna have to take a few photos and it will have to wait until tomorrow. So since I really wanna get this video today, I'm guessing you will see it when I post the finished bag or a little later. Thank you so much for watching.